Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has lost some momentum among voters in his bid for the 2024 GOP presidential nomination, and now conservative media appears to be growing cool. DeSantis is facing criticism from the right leaning media who are questioning his weaker poll numbers and also about his campaign in general.
According to the latest Real Clear Politics polling average, DeSantis is trailing GOP frontrunner former President Donald Trump by double digits. And with the first GOP primary debate just around the corner next month, some say it might be a make-or-break moment for the Florida governor. For more, joining us now is Noah Rothman, senior writer at National Review, who spent a lot of time reflecting and writing on both Trump and Biden. Noah, thanks for joining us. So, Noah, I want to just jump right into this. 3 months ago, everybody had this idea and belief that this was going to be Ron DeSantis' moment. He was going to raise a lot of money, he was going to hit the ground hard and heavy, and there would be a lot of excitement to follow. Well, he left Florida, he went to Ohio, he went to New York. It didn't go so well. Then he traveled across the country. It didn't go so well. And now we're finding ourselves asking, Noah, is this a Jeb Bush or a Scott Walker moment 2.0? And that's certainly what it seems like.
Well, he certainly did raise a lot of money. He has enough money to test the proposition that he can or cannot win delegates when we actually have the votes in January of 2024. So is he a Scott Walker or a Jeb Bush? He's definitely not a Scott Walker. He's not going to be gone in September, which is when Scott Walker dropped out. He could be a Jeb Bush, but he's appealing to a very different idea of the Republican electorate than Jeb Bush had. Jeb Bush was appealing to a particular sort of Republican who elected John McCain and Mitt Romney, not necessarily a moderate conservative, but a conservative voter, but not necessarily one who was in the activist class. Ron DeSantis seems to believe that his energy comes from the activist class. And in my mind, there's a bit of a misreading of what the activist class is in Ron DeSantis' conception. Maybe he genuinely believes some of the things he believes. But for example, let's take foreign policy. Ukraine as an issue, which I don't think is really a big voting issue for Republicans, but it's nevertheless one that exposes deep rifts within the coalition. And what Ron DeSantis is saying is, I'm skeptical of foreign engagements, and maybe we should have some more humility and perhaps even retrench a little bit. That is not what Donald Trump is saying. That may be what his base vote believes, but what Donald Trump says, applying this evaluate him seriously, not literally, approach to this, that framework, he says he can end the war on day one. That's a very foolish thing to say. But what he's saying there is not, let's retrench, let's be humble, let's focus on the real conflicts in the future in China. He's saying we need a muscular, extroverted presence on the world stage, a TR, negotiating big deals abroad. That's a sort of message that does appeal to conservative Republicans, both of the more activist stripe and more conventional conservative stripe. That is not a typical voter that Ron DeSantis' message is appealing to, which makes me wonder if he has his finger on the pulse of the base as much as the people around him appear to think they do.
Yeah, Noah, I'm curious because we see the poll numbers showing Ron DeSantis not performing as well as many people expected, or he's not performing as well as I think even his camp expected, given his strong performance early on. I think you pay very close attention to this. I'm curious your thoughts as to why he's not polling well. We've seen him really attack Donald Trump from the right, pointing out his support of LGBTQ folks in the past, sending out mailers in Iowa, pointing out Donald Trump's support of the LGBTQ plus community in the past. But also we see that the data shows that jobs and the economy are the #1 issue for a lot of voters. And I haven't seen DeSantis really center his campaign around that, but I also haven't really seen any candidate in the GOP center their campaign around that. What do you make of the dip in poll numbers for DeSantis?
Well, I think that point that you made about focusing on bread and butter issues, pocketbook issues, is a real Republican strength that Republicans themselves do not emphasize. And my colleague Charlie Cook over at National Review has written about this recently very cogently, and I think that's something that Republicans should take to heart. But at this stage of the campaign, I don't necessarily believe that's where Ron DeSantis' trouble lies. Ron DeSantis has established for himself a record, an admirable record of competency, and almost a conservative version of being a technocrat in office, the capability to wield the levers of government to deliver for you real results. But his personality is a little bit prickly. And for better or worse, Republican voters really genuinely like Donald Trump as a person. Maybe they have problems with his policy. Maybe they have a lot of problems, I think, in fact, with the way he comports himself and how he trips all over his own feet just by virtue of his own personal failings. But he's an entertaining figure. He's the sort of guy that they enjoy being in a room with. I don't necessarily think Ron DeSantis has the capacity to project that kind of affect, not necessarily warmth per se, but certainly a level of personal gravitas that Ron DeSantis just frankly lacks. Now, can he overcome that? Absolutely. These are far too early days. And when he's in the limelight and when the focus is really on Donald Trump, as it may hopefully will be in the event that he actually decides to debate somebody, that dynamic could very well change. But Ron DeSantis is not broken out of the pack, in part because, in my view, he hasn't distinguished himself from the kind of personality type that Republicans believe they need. They think they need somebody who's going to break things, who's going to frustrate the ambitions of progressives, not just in policy terms, but in cultural terms, which are distinct entirely from legislative affairs. Ron DeSantis has every opportunity to change this dynamic. There's a lot of game left to be played, but he lacks that very central feature of winning Republican political campaigns that he may not be able to overcome.
I just want to quickly follow up on that. When it comes to jobs in the economy, you say DeSantis is a candidate that's really proven to deliver for his constituents, for the people in Florida. What policies or actions would you point to?
I would say property reform, for example. One of the property insurance reform, rather, which is one of these really like under the radar issues that contributed to his 20-point margin of victory in 2022. Similarly, environmentalist issues, the sort of stuff that threads the needle and manages to. It's not sexy. It doesn't generate headlines, but it's the sort of thing that makes moderate voters, independent voters, and even centrist Democrats say, well, I don't really like the way the guy pounds the table. I don't really like his personal vision for the future, but man, he's actually delivered a few things that have made my life better and have an appeal to me in ways that don't make me embarrassed by the other stuff. That's the sort of thing that has contributed to the assumption here that he is a very competent governor who can deliver for his constituencies by not tripping over himself on all the other stuff, by not getting dragged down in the minutia. He's not all Disney. I mean, Disney is the sort of thing that everybody who's outside Florida thinks is the beginning, middle, and end of this governorship. It's not even remotely close if you speak to an actual Floridian. And this is sort of a beltway myopia thing. But these are early days, and we'll get the chance to start talking about policy versus personality and achievements on the debate stage. So again, too early to say, but those are his strengths. And he's not emphasizing his strengths. What he's emphasizing is his vision for the country as he sees it, which isn't really distinct enough from Donald Trump's vision to be a fulcrum in this race.
I mean, no, you mentioned policy. And when you look at something like, let's say, banning certain types of books, you look at abortion, the 6-week ban that came out of Florida. It is very clear by every metric, every survey, this stuff does not register well with most Americans. Look at Wisconsin with the Supreme Court case the Supreme Court race, state Supreme Court race with Janet Protasewicz, the Democrat, ousted the Republican. You look at another state like Kansas, where a majority of the districts that voted for Donald Trump for presidency voted with Democrats to not allow a stricter, more firmer abortion ban. So when I look at policies, I ask myself as a strategist, does this guy have policy positions that can resonate with suburban voters, suburban women, with swing voters who may look at this and say, yeah, I like some of the economic stuff, but I don't want someone telling me as a woman what to do with my body. How does he get over that hurdle? Because Trump has taken a different approach to this. While he, granted, appointed many of the justices to the Supreme Court, he said, wait a minute here. It's up to the states to determine what they want to do on abortion. He's trying to walk that fine line that DeSantis has said, oh, no, absolutely not. 6-week ban and maybe even a national ban. That will not play well, Noah, with the national audience.
Well, no, most certainly not. But sure, Michael, at the risk of offending my hosts here, I would challenge some of your premises there. The notion here that we have a quote unquote book ban is just frankly the wrong terminology to use. What has happened on the state level, with particularly in Republican states, is the de-emphasization and removal from the curricula or removal from certain shelves in a library, not a ban of certain books. And I would challenge Democrats who think that this is an excessive policy to look at the material in these books and read them. And Republicans will absolutely help them along, or perhaps even show some of the illustrations, many of which are extremely sexually explicit and inappropriate for children. I would challenge Democrats to defend that material, and I think Republicans will as well. Likewise, as much as I do agree with you that Republicans should stray close to the finding, the majority opinion in Dobbs, and say that this is a state level issue and the states should experiment and we shouldn't have any sort of a federal standard, Republicans will probably benefit from having a uniform line on this sort of thing. And I do think 6 weeks is perhaps unpalatable for much of the national electorate, although it varies at the state level. But is this an obstacle to Republican victories at the statewide level? Not in Brian Kemp's case, who rode to victory in Georgia with a 6-week ban in place. Likewise, in the Supreme Court fight in the Upper Midwest, you could say that abortion played a role there, and I do. But did it play as much as a role as the candidate, the Republican candidate there, their support for Donald Trump's rather absurd narratives about a stolen election in 2020? And the common through line, if you really look at it, is the stolen election narrative, which really is the one that is the issue that hobbles Republicans. Is a 6-week ban popular? No. Is it a surmountable obstacle to electoral victories at the state and federal level? Absolutely.
So we have a lot of folks in Iowa, I think, very concerned that farmers insurance has just left Florida. We've seen premiums soar up to 206% since DeSantis became governor. I think, he did make property a focus and pass some legislation in May of 2022. A lot of folks are blaming DeSantis for more than half a dozen insurers leaving this state. Do you think that could be something hurting his poll numbers, especially in a state like Iowa that relies a lot on farming and has been struggling with flooding in recent months and years?
Possible. That's a relatively niche issue, but one that would be that Iowa's farmers would be particularly attuned to. I don't know if that's an obstacle to his managing to engineer a victory in Iowa, especially since Donald Trump seems to be intent on sabotaging his campaign in Iowa and has managed to win the presidency beforehand. So, with losing Iowa in 2016, so it's not as though he doesn't see a pathway to the nomination without Iowa. But insurance, the complexities of insurance are something that I think probably will hurt if they can be mobilized by another candidate. So, for example, California is suffering from a very similar condition. Insurers are fleeing the state in droves in response to both environmental conditions and hopelessly anti-consumer regulations that make insurance an unprofitable proposition in the Golden State. Now, is that something that is going to be brought up by the national media? Is that something that is going to register with voters? No, unless a clever candidate can thread the needle and explain why X policy has led to your Y higher premium. That's an open avenue for one of Ron DeSantis's challengers if they were to take it, but it requires a fair bit of exposition. You have to explain that. And that's not necessarily something that candidates are going to want to engage in unless there's, a lot of groundwork done there. If we start seeing, for example, 30-second ads on Iowa television from the Tim Scott campaign or the Haley campaign trying to ding DeSantis on that issue, I would say that, yeah, that's probably a significant issue, but it is not popped right now.
All right, Noah, well, we appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. We'll be right back with more Rising after this.